Hey, what's up, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another Epic 7 how to play video, and in this one we're going to be talking about my personal favorite character that came out of episode 2, Vivian. As with all of the how to play videos, I'm going to be discussing the character's stats, skills, and a couple of possible endgame equipment builds, as well as possibly some pointers on how to use them in PvP and other areas of the actual game. And with the introduction out of the way, let's move on to Vivian's stats. Vivian is an Earth Mage of the Sagittarius zodiac symbol, which means she shares a stat line with top model Lulika. She has 1,228 attack, 4,370 health, 115 speed, 662 defense, 27 critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, and no effectiveness or effect resistance. This is an amazing stat line for an offense-oriented mage, and when we take a look at Vivian's skill set in a second, you'll realize that she is definitely an offense-oriented character that can bring quite a lot of damage. She is great to amazing in almost every single stat line that she has, except for one, and that is her health. 4,370 ties her with Tamarin as the second lowest amongst 5 stars in Epic 7. Koeric, for your reference, is the worst. As a fun fact before moving on, as you know from the Holiday Euphine video, in the English dub of Epic 7, Vivian is voiced by Kat Cressida, who also voices Euphine, Charlotte, and Falconer Clury. When we take a look at her Japanese dub, however, she is voiced by Shizuka Ito, who is famous for her big ara energy characters such as Akino from High School DxD, Luvia from the Fate franchise, and female Byleth from not only Fire Emblem, but Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Vivian's S1 is Vitality Drain. It has a 1.2x attack multiplier and increases her combat readiness by 10 to 15%. If she lands a critical hit, you get an additional 10% combat readiness. If you do not know, 1.2x attack is very high and amongst the very best in Epic 7 when it comes to a single target S1. The fact that a 115 speed character also gets 25% combat readiness to boot means that Vivian will be taking quite a number of turns. Excellent S1. Her S2 is her signature skill, Thunder God's Cry. She gets 2 souls when she uses it, and it has a very low 2-turn cooldown. It attacks all enemies with an AoE of 1.05x attack multiplier. If for some reason you kill an enemy with Thunder God's Cry, it will activate a second time with a 0.55x attack multiplier. If the second Thunder God's Cry kills an enemy, it will activate a third and final time with a 0.3x attack multiplier. You will see people commonly refer to this move as the flush because of its interesting swirl animation that makes it look like things being flushed down a toilet, and that is exactly what will happen to an enemy team should you set up Vivian properly. This move does quite a lot of damage for a basic non-ultimate AoE attack, and then the fact that it can trigger multiple times, and you'll see in a second when we talk about the S3 and the buffs that gives, when you pair those in tandem, you can very easily flush an entire enemy team away and win the game in one fell swoop. This is a really powerful S2 and it is a core component to not only Vivian's gameplay, but building a number of PvE compositions that allow you to quickly steamroll through them and get them done in a timely manner. Her S3 is Mana Amplification. It gives 3 souls upon use and has a 5 to 6 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It grants the entire team immunity for 3 turns before giving Vivian greater attack buff for 3 turns. And if you remember from the Sermia video, anytime a character can give themselves a greater attack buff, you should take note because it gives them just a massive attack increase, a massive damage increase overall. But that's not all. She also gives everyone else on her team that's not her a 3-turn attack buff. And as of the recording of this video, attack buff is really OP in a lot of scenarios. So this is another potential attack buffer for you if you want to play her in RTA. But because this move gives the attack buff and she is also paired with a really powerful AoE S2 is what makes her so good. A lot of the best PvE farming compositions in the game require an attack buff and also are using an AoE to get past the first wave to clear it quickly and efficiently. The fact that Vivian gives your whole team an attack buff and has a powerful S2 on a short cooldown means that many of the fastest farming teams in the game, Vivian is a key component. Basically, she is almost optimal for most hunts that are not Wyvern and not Katie's. So I think, in my opinion, for that reason alone, she is a must-pull hero, and we'll talk more about those builds in the next section when we talk about those equipments, EEs, artifacts, and so on and so forth. Her S2 increases the damage on Thunder God's Cry for 10 souls. It's an excellent soul burn simply because you do get that attack buff from the S3, and then you will very easily be able to have this soul burn up, use it to flush away the enemy team, and get quite a lot of damage out of it. It increases the damage from a 1.05x multiplier to a 1.3x multiplier. I am unsure as to whether or not the second or third attack from the soul burn actually has its damage increase. There's no real way for me to test that and verify that, so I apologize in advance. But with a 1.3x attack multiplier, that's really good. That is about as good as you could probably honestly get on a non-ultimate skill in this game. So it is definitely something that is nice to have. When it comes to Molagora priorities, you want to max mana amplification first just to reduce the cooldown, especially if you're using her in PvP. After that, you want to max Thunder God's Cry because this is the bulk of the damage and the main reason you're probably playing Vivian. Again, this is the signature skill. Only max S1 if you were trying to play this character in RTA or PvP or whatever have you, because it's not really super needed if you're only using her for her S2 to farm quickly and efficiently. So keep that in mind. Before we jump into the builds, let's first talk about Vivian's exclusive equipment, which is True Sight. I'm assuming for all my calculations you have a max roll on, which is 14% health. If we take a look at the actual exclusive equipments, I don't have the first one, but what it does is it gives you an extra 5% CR whenever you use your S1 and you land a critical hit. Considering a critical hit already gives you 25% CR and Vivian's already pretty fast, the extra 5% really doesn't do a lot. It's not a bad EE, but the other two I think are a lot better, and we'll talk about those now. The one that I think most of you guys should play, especially if you're trying to play her for the hunt one-shot, and even if you're trying to play her as a DPS and RTA, you should probably be using the second one, which is whenever you use her S3, it increases her combat readiness by 50%. This means that you can come back around very quickly with that S2 with the greater attack buff and cleave through either the first wave of a specific hunt or potentially cleave through an enemy's entire team. In most cases, I would say 99% of the time, this is the EE that I assume that you are on, and unless I tell you otherwise, this is probably the one that you should be playing. Her third one is another change to mana amplification. The third one here makes it so that you dispel one debuff from everybody before you apply the attack buff and the immunity from mana amplification. It's very situational, but I could see the case being made for a very fast support Vivian running this to kind of counter a specific debuff comp, like maybe you're trying to get ahead or contest a Basar with a very fast Vivian and you just don't quite succeed, but this EE will give you kind of like a small safety net. There are niche applications I could see and argue being made. It's not a bad EE. I just think that the second one is better for most players a lot of the time. There is something that I think it could be played in, and we'll talk about that in the second build in this section in tandem with Tehagel's, but for the most part, again, second one I think is what you want to be on. Vivian is an amazing hunt character, and in my opinion, the best one in all of Epic 7, and that is because of her second exclusive equipment. Traditionally, the way you would clear the enemies on the first wave of a hunt is you would have somebody like a Soul Weaver provide an attack buff to one of your AoE characters who would then cleave through the entire wave of enemies. But since Vivian is fast and she is also an attack buffer and can also be an AoE cleaver, she does it all in one. No need to waste a slot on a Soul Weaver, which means your 4th slot can have some extra utility or some more damage in the form of a character like Soul Bad Guy or Watcher Shuri. And that allows for much more impactful and consistent comps that can clear hunts within 60 to 90 seconds. I think Vivian is a must-pull hero because 99% of Epic 7 is getting gear for your heroes. Having better gear means you can clear harder content and also win more PvP games. She is 100% worth your time and investment to build. Having a fast hunt run means that during hunt buffs, you'll be acquiring a lot more gear than if you were still running a standard 3 to 5 minute run on some of these hunts. So, with that little spiel out of the way, let's talk about the build now. So this build is for one-shotting Golem, Banshee, and Asthmatic 13. So if you need a character that can do those hunts, Vivian is your girl. She is going to be on speed crit. Speed is so that she can cycle fast enough back around off that 50% CR boost that she gets from her S3, and crit is to lighten the burden of gear on the character. As a side note, if you really want to play Vivian, or at least are having trouble gearing her and you have the means to do so, she has a critical hit chance imprint, and that is one of the better imprints in the game. Obviously speed is the best, but crit hit chance is the second best. So if you are somebody who really likes Vivian and potentially wants to use Vivian outside of Hunt later on in the future, I highly recommend you try to pick up a couple extra copies of her for her imprint. And then also Dignisorb on her banner is 100% worth it, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Looking at the desired stats, you want 3,600 attack, 1,000 defense. This is simply so you don't just randomly get one shot in Asymanic 13 by the ads in the first wave if you don't lap in a timely manner. 8k health, this is literally just the EE plus the I-90 helmet. You'll actually probably have a little bit more than this. I think you have 80-40, but I decided to go with a nice even 8k for the spreadsheet. 220 speed, this is what I personally play. You can play a little bit slower than this. I think 205, 210 also works. Just keep in mind, for certain hunts, certain characters need to be exactly 10 speed or faster than Vivian, and there are characters that might need to be slightly slower, 10 to 20 speed slower than Vivian for most of your hunts. So the entire hunt is going to be built around the Vivian. If your Vivian's going to be 210, then obviously certain characters are going to be 220, others are going to be like 190 to 200. So just keep that in mind wherever she ends up on the speed spectrum between like 200 and 230. You're going to have to build and adjust the other units accordingly. 100% crit hit chance. This is so that way, if you're playing her in Golem or Asymanic where you don't have type advantage, you can still crit. Having any consistent run is super helpful. You just don't want to have like a 50% clear rate. You want like a 75 to 85% clear rate on a lot of hunts. And then 280 or more critical hit damage. Again, 360, or I should say 3600 attack plus 280 crit hit damage is usually enough to wipe the wave for the first floor in a lot of instances. And if it's not, for in the case of like Asymanic, you have another cleaver to help you lessen the load. Taking a look at the right side, you're going to be on crit damage necklace, attack percentage ring, and speed boots. This is just the standard DPS setup for trying to kill things quickly. Looking at the artifact, for most people in most scenarios, Dignisorb is going to be the play for its padded survivability and additional enhancement to attack. I use Dignisorb specifically for Golem and Banshee. Time Matter is what I play for Asymanic, and which artifact you're going to play on her is going to, again, depend entirely on your team, your setup, and what hunt you're playing. So I highly recommend you try all three of the options listed here: Dignisorb, Time Matter, and Daydream Joker. My stats assume you're on Daydream Joker for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're like my guildmate, you can play Daydream Joker on all three of your teams because you have everything lined up correctly. All of your characters' gear kind of makes it work, so you don't have to switch around like I do. And then also, you may not have the other 5-star artifacts, so Daydream Joker, everyone has it, so that's the second reason why we're using it. When we took a look at the per piece average, we want 17% attack, 10% crit chance, 12% crit damage, and 7 or more speed per piece. While it's not super relevant right now, I want to, for completeness sake, at least include a PvP DPS / flex support build for Vivian. This is going to be for those of you who are really desperate for a green DPS or just really want to play this character in RTA. Again, the meta does not super favor her right now because there are quite a number of good red DPS, and then the blue DPS that are around do really punish AoEs and things like that. So again, not a terrible pick right now, but she definitely is not as good as she once was, so keep that in mind. As a note, if you want to just have her as a pure DPS, you just stick with that second EE. But if you do want to flex as a support, kind of have her be somebody who's just there to either get a cleanse or set up immunity and attack buff, then you're going to want to play that third EE. Taking a look at her stats, we want 3,600 attack. Again, I've seen as high as 3,800 with a stat line that's similar to this. Just try and get what you can. If you can only get like 3,450, 3,400, by all means, go for it. 1,200 defense. Again, if you can't get this high, go for like 1,100, 1,125. The reason I put some defense on here is because we're most likely going to be on Dignisorb. And Vivian's health pool is, for lack of a better word, crap. So it's not really worth it to build health if you want her to at least be able to survive a hit. The barrier that Dignisorb provides is huge, and you still have to check defense versus that barrier. So by having a lot of defense with that big barrier, you're going to last a lot longer than if you had just built health. 8k health, again, this is literally just her base health on I-90 gear with an artifact. You'll probably even have more than that. You might have like 8,200. 250 speed or better. This is, something that used to be quite fast, but the current meta feels like everybody's between 235, 255 speed for the most part. I don't think I would really go lower speed than this if you are in the upper areas like Challenger or Champion. I definitely don't think I would go much lower than this speed. For everybody else, just again try and get what you can get. 100% crit hit chance. We're not on crit set. This is going to be a lot harder to get for a lot of you guys. I feel like we want to be on immunity just so we can't be stunned or slept before we can get that attack buff and immunity up. Especially if you were flexing her as a support, you're there for the immunity granting as well as the attack buff. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And then we have 250 critical hit damage, less than the Hunt build. But I feel like with this attack and this level of critical hit damage, even if you're flexing her as a support, you can threaten some very serious damage because of that greater attack buff that she has built into her actual kit. Taking a look at the right side, you want to be on a crit damage necklace, attack percentage ring, speed boots, and the artifact 99% of the time I feel like is Dignosword because of that barrier to help her survive as well as push extra damage. If you are flexing her as a support though, I can see an argument being made for Tehagel's Ancient Book. If you're only playing her for the cleanse, the immunity, and the attack buff, you don't care if she lives. You've already gotten the souls from just entering the fight, so I could see the argument being made to have her just be blazing fast, just set up the buffs, and then die, and then just kind of have the Ancient Book. And then if somehow they just don't kill her, you still have the offensive stats to threaten to cleave. So there you go. That's pretty much the reason why we're still going with the high attack. These stats assume a plus 15 Dignosword because, again, not everyone has Dignosword, and not everyone has a plus 31. If you are trying to play her in PvP, whether that's Guild Wars, RTA, whatever, I still highly recommend pulling for Dignosword. It's super, super worth it on the characters that it's good on. Looking at the average piece, we want 17% attack, 12% crit chance, 6% crit damage, and 12 speed or better per piece. Normally, I only focus on World Arena and teammate suggestions, but considering this is a character who is largely used for her Hunt one-shot potential, and I've shown clips of both of these characters used in this video, I'd be completely remiss to not at least explain why Green Leo and Shadow Rose are great and how to actually at least build them. They basically are openers that set up the first wave so that Vivian can very easily cleave through them. Leo is the optimal choice for every hunt, but you can use Shadow Rose depending on your gear. For Leo, you simply need him at 10 speed faster than whatever your Vivian ends up on. You need his S2 at +4, and you need 65% effectiveness. For Shadow Rose, 200 speed is fine, and again, the same level of effectiveness is fine. No Molagoras for her. However, Shadow Rose is significantly more difficult to use for both Golem and Azimanic, so keep that in mind. That's why Leo is the optimal choice. For World Arena teammate suggestions, you only really need two things for Vivian. You need to have some form of protection for her, and for that you can use standard Arius holders, like like a blue Crow for example, but you could also use Fallen Cecilia for those awesome barriers. You can even use a character like Troublemaker Crozet for the damage share. And then the other thing she really cares about is characters that can help her set up her S2 so she can cleave through an entire team, and that's usually in the form of defense breaks. When Vivian was really popular in the RTA meta, she was usually accompanied with Falconer Clury, and I would assume that if you were trying to use her as like a pseudo cleave character, a character like Flan is probably great as well, considering that she has not only a CR push to help your Vivian kind of cycle turns quicker, but she has a defense break as well. There are a plethora of other characters that can help her set up her flush mechanic, but for the most part, these are the ones that I have come to mind first and foremost. Vivian is not exactly the most advantaged hero in the current RTA meta that we are in as of the recording of this video, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have usage. She does excel extremely well against, obviously, blue DPS because she is a green DPS with quite a bit of damage. You can use her into a character like Seaside Bologna or Rem and slowly focus them down with the S1, and then that will potentially set up a possible flush with her S2 and wipe out the entire team. You can also use her to combat stealth heroes in very niche scenarios. Blue Kisei comes to mind specifically because of how squishy they are, and you do have the elemental advantage. You could use her against Spectre, but I feel like the way that people play Spectre nowadays, she's a little bit too tanky, and you might accidentally pick Vivian into a cleave comp because a lot of cleave players like to lead with Spectre nowadays. So you don't want to accidentally put yourself in a scenario where you end up being in a bad matchup. So try to keep picking Vivian in like the 4 to 5 slot if you can. And then lastly, if you are flexing with her as a support, again, like we talked about before, she might be a decent answer to Basar if you don't have much else. So now let's talk about bad matchups, and you'll see right away why Vivian isn't exactly favored right now. But if you do not see a lot of these characters and you do see some blue heroes, it might be worth considering giving Vivian a shot in RTA. The bad matchups, first and foremost, she's not super good against characters like Selene and Politis. Selene's S2 can literally burst through your Dignus Orb barrier. I don't care how thick it is. A properly built Selene will cleave you and kill your Vivian, so she will have very low game impacts since without her buffs, she doesn't do a ton. Politis is very similar. She has elemental advantage on you. Most people build her as a damage dealer or a cleaver, and she might have things like Yellow Violin, which completely just nullifies your S3 entirely. They're also obviously high-powered, tanky red DPS in the format, in the form of things like Researcher Carrot or Red Charlotte. And then since she is so squishy and she's not exactly the fastest, certain speedy DPS can just go ahead of her and burst her outright and just take her out of the fight before she has 0 game impact. Think of things like Assassin Sid or Assassin Kali. And that is going to do it for the how to play guide on Vivian. I cannot stress it enough. The character is one of the best hunt characters in the game. And when 95+% of the game is hunting to get better gear, to do other facets of the game, you should take notice. You should try to get yourself a Vivian. You should try to invest in her. I really do think she's worth it. If you were on the fence and you just didn't pull for her because you're kind of underwhelmed by how I'm making her sound in RTA, I promise you, she is a very powerful character. And even though this is not really her meta games shift all the time. I speak from experience playing a lot of card games. Certain cards that might not be particularly good, all it takes is 1 to 2 new cards being added to the pool for them to suddenly find relevance. Because Vivian is so powerful in PvE, and because her stat line is so good for an offense-oriented character, and she does so much damage, I do think that this character will rise at some point yet again. So hopefully that will dispel any doubts you have on pulling for her. As always, let me know down in the comments below what I missed, what you guys want to see next, and that's pretty much going to be it from me. Have a good one, enjoy the rest of your day, and the rest of your week. I'll see you later.